Hey everyone, this is another BookTube channel. Today I'll be talking about some of my favorite graphic novels that I read in 2022. When I started this channel, I wasn't sure if I wanted to include graphic novels and comic books as part of my content, but they are a huge part of my reading experience, so it felt a little disingenuous to keep them off of my reading channel entirely. I also want to do my part to destroy any idea you may have in thinking that comics and graphic novels are not real reading. These are books. The only difference is that instead of reading written descriptions of settings, characters, and action, you read those things as pictures laid out in sequential format. You essentially become part of the storytelling experience, working alongside the writer and artist to bring the story to life. It's a wonderful collaborative art form, and some of the best stories I've ever read have come from comics. If you're under the impression that comics are only superhero stories for kids, it could be that just nobody has ever given you a good starting point into the medium. That's what I'm hoping this list provides for you here. I'll be talking about a variety of comics that each have their own style, mood, and intended audience. Yes, one of them will be a superhero comic, but one will also be a realistic, heartbreaking collection of short stories that are guaranteed to leave an impact on you. So here we go. In no particular order, here are 5 comics and graphic novels that I enjoyed most in 2022. Let's start by talking about a comic that may appeal to you if you are a horror fan or a fan of David Lynch movies, and that's Black Hole by Charles Burns. Black Hole is the story of a sexually transmitted disease that is afflicting the teenagers of sleepy suburban Seattle in the 1970s. That was a lot of alliteration. Once infected with the disease, symptoms present themselves as physical deformations of the body. Some are lucky and able to hide their mutation easily, others not so much. Those with extremely visible symptoms become social outcasts, and many of them take to just running away to live in the woods nearby. Black Hole follows 2 characters, Keith and Chris, as they each have experiences with the disease and the diseased while navigating the perils and pitfalls of coming of age. Black Hole was originally a 12-issue limited series published between 1995 and 2005 by writer and artist Charles Burns. Burns has a distinct art style with heavy black inks that adds to the grungy atmosphere of the book. Despite being set in the 70s, this story is oozing with the 90s grunge attitude popularized by Seattle bands like Nirvana. It's also full of psychedelic imagery that is as beautiful as it is terrifying. The art is the real star here, but the story is really strong as well, tackling the feelings of ennui and otherness that being a teenager can bring. Next up, something completely different, Thor. I don't read a lot of modern Marvel comics, but I do like a lot of the old stuff, and I finally got around to reading the acclaimed run of Thor by Walt Simonson. His run is collected in 5 volumes, and I read 4 of them in 2022. I'm probably not going to read the 5th one, and I'll explain why later. The 4 volumes that I read collect Thor number 337 through 374, along with the 4-issue miniseries Balder the Brave. This was a tremendously fun series to read and didn't require a great deal of prior Thor knowledge to really enjoy. I was able to jump into this series blind and come away without feeling lost, which is a big barrier for a lot of comic books, particularly like Marvel and DC. A big part of that is because in this era of comics, characters were still known to deliver a great deal of exposition at length in their dialogue to make sure that new readers could catch up quickly. This run introduces the awesome character Beta Ray Bill, an alien who is also worthy of wielding Thor's magic hammer Mjolnir. This run also has Thor battling the fire giant Surtur in order to prevent Ragnarok, and it also features Thor turning into a frog and leading a frog rebellion against the rats of Central Park in New York City. Look, comics are silly sometimes. It's fine. Walt Simonson is an absolute master at capturing movement, action, and emotion in his cartooning, and it's a joy to look at throughout this run. At first glance, his lines can seem loose and random, but they are just a perfect shorthand that expertly communicates what he is trying to show. His compositions are incredible and well thought out, and the reading flow is immaculate. These are just incredibly fun books. The only reason I don't plan on reading the 5th and final volume in this run is because Walt is no longer doing the artwork by then. At that point, he hands off the duties to Sal Buscema, who is good, but he's not Walt. Next up, we've got The Complete 8-Ball by Dan Clowes. Boy, oh boy, how on earth am I going to explain 8-Ball? The first 18 issues of 8-Ball, which is what's collected here, were published between 1989 and 1997, with additional issues being published up until 2004. This series is one of the most successful alternative comics ever made, and for good reason. These issues of 8-Ball are a mixture of serialized stories, short self-contained stories, rants, musings, satires, and basically any other weird thing that Dan Clowes wanted to do. The stories range from realistic to outlandish, with a common thread between each being Clowes' trademark cynicism. As far as cartoonists go, Dan Clowes is a living legend, and this collection is a wonderful artifact which binds all of his neuroses and commentary into a single, thick volume. One of the most well-known stories from 8-Ball is Ghost World, which is probably known due to the popularity of the 2001 film of the same name by Terry Zwigoff. This volume also collects the nightmarish noir story Like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron, which is a wild ride of paranoia and conspiracy. As you can see, I've tagged my copy so that I can easily find the next chapter in each serialized story, but you can also read this straight through as the issues originally hit stands. It's weird, it's funny, and it's unlike anything you've likely seen before. Next up is a series that quickly asserted itself as one of my favorites of all time, The Goon by Eric Powell. I read the first 2 omnibuses of The Goon last year, which covers, I think, the first 18 issues of the series, plus an original graphic novel, and I absolutely love it. The series is a mix of comedy and horror, all bundled up in a 1930s gangster package. The titular goon and his loudmouth pal Frankie are frequently put up against supernatural threats to their little slum, such as zombies, ghouls, mad scientists, mutated animals, robots, and more. Everything about this series just crackles with energy. Writer and artist Eric Powell might be one of the most talented cartoonists I've ever seen, expertly switching between pencils, inks and washes, and paints based on what medium best suits the story. His character and creature designs are whimsical and inspired, with an obvious influence from early sci-fi and horror movies. Even if you don't read a single dialogue bubble, you could enjoy a full visual feast just flipping through these pages. Powell also deftly moves between tones when he wants to, which is important considering how many genres he is tapping into here. Blending comedy and horror alone is hard enough, but to blend comedy and horror and gangster movies and science fiction and leaving room for human moments of sadness and loss is a triumph. I've picked up the 3rd omnibus and do intend to read it very soon, and if the series stays this good, I might consider The Goon to be my desert island comic book. I really didn't think that there'd be a comic that would top The Goon for me last year, but there is one more graphic novel that resonated with me and left me stunned, and that is Sleepwalk and Other Stories by Adrian Tomine. Sleepwalk and Other Stories collects the first 4 issues of Tomine's alternative comic Optic Nerve. Each issue is an anthology of short stories, similar to 8-Ball, that range from 1 to 12 pages in length. The common mood of the stories is one of melancholy and uncertainty, and they're often surprising in their poignancy despite the lack of action. I think the best way to describe this book to you is to spoil a single story for you, just to give you an idea of what you're dealing with. This story is called Lunch Break. It opens with an old woman alone in her home. She turns off the TV and slowly heads to the kitchen to make herself a sandwich for lunch. She packs it up in a brown paper bag and heads outside to an old car and gets in the passenger seat to start eating. On the page turn, we are snapped back in time to the woman when she was young. She's heading out from work for her lunch break and meets her boyfriend outside, picking her up in that same car. They share small talk, and discuss possibly moving in together soon. They kiss, he drives her back to work, and he tells her he'll pick her up later. On the next page turn, we're back in the present. The woman is old again, staring down at her half-eaten sandwich in the passenger seat of the scratched and dented old car with an empty driver's seat. She gets out, goes back inside, throws the sandwich away, and goes back to watching TV. This is a story in which nothing happens. An old woman eats a sandwich in her car. And yet, it's a successful, bittersweet story of lifelong love and happiness and the heartbreaking reality of the loss that comes at the end of it. We don't need any dialogue to tell us that she misses her husband. There's no scene where she bumps into a neighbor and says, "Oh, he used to pick me up in this car when we were young, and I like to eat my lunch in there to remember those times, and I leave the driver's seat empty for him." No, we understand that implicitly from the quiet moments from panel to panel. My heart breaks for this woman, and all she did was eat a sandwich in a 5-page story. Sleepwalk and Other Stories is full of vignettes like this that leave you with a lump in your throat or make you feel like you just got punched in the gut. So make sure you're in the right frame of mind when you read it, but above all else, read it. It's amazing. So that is my list of the top graphic novels I read in 2022. I tried to give a variety here, so hopefully you found something you might be interested in and will give it a shot. Let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments below and your thoughts about them. Thank you for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.